For Olivia Harrison, the 8,000-square-foot Greenwich estate was a sanctuary, a marble and glass promise of the perfect life to come. Every night she'd drift to sleep in a custom-made bed, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her pregnant belly, cocooned in the silent luxury of a $10 million world. She believed her husband Spencer was her partner in this dream. But while she slept, he was awake. He was just a few hundred feet away in the guest house, tangled in the sheets with her own sister Zoe. They shared whispers not of love, but of ambition. And the biggest secret of all, the magnificent estate, the symbol of their life, wasn't his. It was a gilded car, and the lock was about to turn. The late July heat hung thick and heavy over Greenwich, Connecticut, but inside the sprawling Davenport estate, the air was chilled to a precise 68 degrees. It was a world hermetically sealed from discomfort, a world of Palladian windows overlooking manicured lawns that rolled down to the calm, dark waters of the Long Island Sound. This was Olivia Harrison's world, though she still felt like a guest in it sometimes. She stood before one of those massive windows in the master suite, her reflection a soft silhouette against the twilight. At 7 months pregnant, her body had a new, unfamiliar gravity. She traced the curve of her stomach, a smile playing on her lips. She could feel the faint, fluttery kicks of her son, their son. Hers and Spencer's. Spencer. The thought of him brought a warmth that had nothing to do with the setting sun. He was everything she had ever wanted. Handsome, driven with a charm that could disarm the most cynical of her father's business associates. He'd come from a modest background in Michigan, a stark contrast to her own blue-blooded upbringing, and she admired his grit, his hunger. He made her feel grounded, seen not as Olivia Davenport, the heiress, but just as Olivia. Admiring the view, my love, Spencer's voice, smooth as single malt Scotch, came from behind her. He wrapped his arms around her, his hands coming to rest over hers on her belly. He smelled of expensive cologne and the faint, crisp scent of the linen suit he'd worn to his meetings in the city. Just thinking, she murmured, leaning back against his chest, about how perfect everything is. This house, the baby, us. It is perfect, he agreed, his lips brushing her temple. And you deserve it all. But as he held her, his eyes drifted over her shoulder to the estate below. He saw the tennis courts, the infinity pool shimmering under the first evening lights, the separate 6-car garage, and the quaint, stone-walled guest house nestled amongst a grove of old oak trees. He saw $10 million of Davenport legacy. It was a constant, suffocating reminder that while he lived in this palace, he didn't own a single stone of it. The prenuptial agreement his father-in-law, Richard Davenport, had insisted upon was as ironclad as the vault in the family's downtown bank. Spencer was a salaried manager in the Davenport empire, a well-kept consort, and the gilded bars of his cage were starting to feel less like protection and more like a prison. The tension was a low hum beneath the surface of their perfect life. It surfaced in small ways. When he suggested a riskier stock investment, and Olivia gently deferred to her father's financial advisor. When he wanted to replace the classic Mercedes in the garage with a flashier Lamborghini, and she reminded him it was technically her mother's car. Each instance was a small paper cut to his ego. That evening the hum grew louder. Olivia's sister Zoe was joining them for dinner. Zoe was the family's beautiful, volatile storm cloud. 2 years younger than Olivia, she possessed a sharp-edged glamour that made Olivia's quiet elegance seem pale in comparison. Where Olivia was soft, Zoe was flint. She'd drifted through art schools, dabbled in fashion design, and lived a life funded by the family trust, but defined by a rebellious streak that constantly grated on their father. Dinner was served on the veranda, the table set with heirloom silver and crystal that glittered in the candlelight. Zoe, dressed in a slinky black dress that seemed designed to defy the Connecticut dress code, swirled her wine and watched Spencer over the rim of her glass. So Spencer, she began, her voice a sultry drawl. How does it feel to be lord of the manor? Must be nice to have all this space. She gestured vaguely at the sprawling grounds. Zoe, please. Olivia sighed, a familiar note of exhaustion in her voice. I'm just asking. Zoe said, her eyes still locked on Spencer. It's a big step up from Grand Rapids, isn't it? Spencer's smile didn't falter, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. It's a beautiful home. Olivia has impeccable taste. He deftly deflected, turning the compliment to his wife. Oh, Liv has taste all right, Zoe conceded, finally looking at her sister. She always did pick the shiniest toy in the store. The insult veiled as it was landed. Olivia flinched, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. She looked at Spencer, expecting him to defend her, to put Zoe in her place. But he simply took a slow sip of his water, his expression unreadable. In that moment, a tiny cold seed of doubt was planted in Olivia's heart. She saw a flicker of something pass between her husband and her sister, a shared understanding, a glint of conspiracy that she couldn't decipher. I'm feeling a little tired, Olivia announced, pushing her chair back. I think I'll turn in early. Spencer was immediately by her side, the perfect concerned husband once more. Of course, my love. Let me help you up. As he walked her towards the grand staircase, Olivia glanced back. Zoe was still sitting at the table, a single candle illuminating her face. She raised her glass in a silent, mocking toast. Spencer didn't see it. Or if he did, he gave no sign. He kissed Olivia's forehead at the top of the stairs, promising to be up in a little while. I love you, Spence, Olivia whispered, clinging to the idea of him like a life raft. I love you more, he replied automatically. She retreated into the cool, silent sanctuary of their bedroom, leaving him alone in the cavernous hallway. Spencer stood there for a long moment, listening to her footsteps fade. He straightened his tie, his face hardening. The performance was over. He walked back down the stairs, not towards the veranda, but towards the front door. He pulled out his phone. A new text message was waiting for him. It was from Zoe. Guest house. 10 minutes. He typed a quick reply. On my way. He slipped out into the humid night air, the heavy scent of night-blooming jasmine filling his lungs. In the main house, his pregnant wife drifted into a trusting sleep, dreaming of their perfect future. And in the guest house, her sister waited, ready to help him burn it all to the ground. The guest house was a miniature version of the main estate, a charming 2-bedroom cottage of fieldstone and slate. It was originally built for esteemed visitors, but for the past year it had become Zoe's on-again, off-again residence whenever she tired of her Soho apartment. It was her private kingdom on the edge of Olivia's. Spencer didn't bother with the main door. He walked around to the back patio, the flagstones cool beneath his leather shoes. The French doors were ajar, spilling a sliver of warm yellow light onto the manicured grass. Inside, Zoe was perched on a sleek, modern bar stool, a bottle of bourbon, and 2 glasses on the granite countertop before her. She'd let her hair down, and it fell in a dark cascade over the shoulders of her black dress. Took you long enough, she said without turning around. She'd been watching his approach in the reflection of the dark window. I had to play the part, Spencer replied, stepping inside and closing the doors behind him. The air in the guest house was different. It smelled of Zoe's expensive, musky perfume and whiskey. It smelled like rebellion. The doting husband. It's a good look for you. A little pathetic, but good. She poured a generous measure of bourbon into each glass. Drink. You know I do. He took the glass she offered, the ice clinking softly. He downed half of it in one go, the fiery liquid a welcome shock to his system. It burned away the last vestiges of the cloying, perfect life he'd left behind in the main house. She's so oblivious, Zoe mused, tracing the rim of her glass with a blood-red nail. Walking around in her little cashmere bubble, rubbing her belly, thinking she has it all. Does she have any idea what you're really like? She sees what she wants to see. Spencer said, his voice low. He walked around the counter until he was standing behind her. He placed his hands on her shoulders, his fingers kneading the tense muscles there. She sees the man who will give her the life she thinks she wants. Zoe leaned her head back, her hair brushing against his chest. And what about the life you want? Spence, is this it? Playing second fiddle to Daddy Davenport, living off the scraps from his table. Being allowed to manage one of his smaller firms like a child with a new toy. Her words were venomous, but they were also a balm to his wounded pride. She understood. She was the only one who had ever truly seen the ravenous ambition behind his charming smile. Their connection wasn't new. It had been a slow burn, starting with flirtatious barbs at family functions, escalating to clandestine texts. And now this. A conspiracy of two. He doesn't respect me. Spencer admitted the words, tasting like ash. He never has. To him, I'll always be the scholarship kid from the Midwest who got lucky. You didn't get lucky. You got my sister Zoe, corrected him sharply. And in doing so, you got a life sentence with Richard Davenport as your warden. He holds all the keys, Spencer. The house, the cars, the money. Your whole life is a loner. She twisted on the stool to face him, her dark eyes boring into his. But it doesn't have to be. The air crackled with unspoken possibilities. This was their ritual. The stoking of resentments, the fanning of flames. This was the foundation of their twisted alliance. It wasn't just about sex. It was about power. They were two predators, sizing up the same prize from different angles. What are you suggesting, Zoe, he asked, though he already knew. I'm suggesting that the Davenport fortune is big enough for more than one person to have a real piece of it. Olivia is too soft to run the empire when Dad finally steps down. He knows it. He's grooming her for a life of charity balls and motherhood. But you have the killer instinct. And me? She smirked. I have the name. And I know where all the bodies are buried, financially speaking. She stood up, closing the space between them. She reached up and loosened his tie, her fingers cool against his skin. Together we could be unstoppable. We could have it all. Not the loner version. The real thing. His heart was hammering in his chest, a frantic drumbeat of fear and exhilaration. This was the ultimate betrayal, a treachery so profound it made his head spin. He was standing here plotting to usurp his father-in-law with his wife's sister, while his wife slept soundly carrying his child. A wave of guilt washed over him, so potent it almost made him step back. He saw Olivia's trusting face, her soft smile. But then he saw Richard Davenport's condescending gaze, heard his patronizing tone. He felt the suffocating weight of the prenup, the invisible walls of the gilded cage. Greed, raw and powerful, snuffed out the guilt like a candle. "And Olivia," he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Zoe's face hardened. "Olivia will be fine. She'll have her baby. She'll be taken care of. She always is. This isn't about her. It's about us. It's about what we deserve." She didn't need to say anything more. He leaned in and kissed her, a bruising, desperate kiss that was nothing like the gentle affection he gave Olivia. This was a kiss of shared hunger, of dark pacts and broken trusts. It was a seal on their conspiracy. He swept her into his arms and carried her towards the bedroom, leaving the 2 glasses and the bottle of bourbon on the counter like evidence of a crime. And as the humid Connecticut night deepened, Spencer Harrison, the man who seemingly had everything committed, the one act of betrayal from which there could be no return. Not realizing he was just a pawn in a much larger game, he couldn't even begin to comprehend. The next morning, Spencer slipped back into the main house just before dawn. He showered the hot water, failing to wash away the scent of Zoe's perfume that clung to his skin, or the film of deceit that coated his soul. He dressed in a fresh suit, selected a Patek Philippe watch from his valet box, a birthday gift from Olivia, and entered the master bedroom with a tray bearing a croissant and a single white rose. Olivia was just waking up, blinking in the soft morning light. She smiled when she saw him, a pure, unguarded smile that sent a pang of something he refused to identify as guilt through his chest. "You're up early," she said, her voice thick with sleep. Big day at the office, he lied smoothly, placing the tray on her lap. "Wanted to make sure my 2 favorite people were taken care of first." He leaned down to kiss her, but she turned her head slightly so his lips met her cheek. A small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it was enough. The first thread had been pulled. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his internal alarms ringing. "Just tired," she said, her eyes not quite meeting his. "I didn't sleep well. Strange dreams." Throughout the day, a chilling quiet emanated from her. Her texts were brief, her replies to his calls monosyllabic. Spencer chalked it up to pregnancy hormones, a convenient excuse he used to soothe his own fraying nerves. He immersed himself in work at the subsidiary firm Richard had given him to run Davenport Logistics. He moved numbers, shuffled accounts, and made a series of wire transfers to an offshore entity, a secret nest egg he'd been building for months. It was his insurance policy, his escape route, if things went sour. The thrill of the deception, both financial and marital, was a potent drug. The unraveling began not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet, mundane discovery. 2 days after his night with Zoe, Olivia was overseeing the weekly deep clean of the estate. Maria, the head housekeeper who had been with the Davenport family for 30 years, approached her in the library. She held a small silver object in her gloved hand. "Mrs. Harrison." Maria said, her face troubled. "I found this in the guest house by the bed in the guest room. I do not recognize it." Olivia looked at the object. It was a custom Zippo lighter exquisitely crafted from sterling silver. Engraved on one side was a single stylized Z. Olivia's blood ran cold. She had seen it 100 times before. It was a one-of-a-kind piece she had commissioned for Zoe's 25th birthday from a boutique in Soho. Zoe never went anywhere without it. "Thank you, Maria Olivia," said her voice, betraying none of the turmoil raging inside her. I'll see that it gets back to its owner." She held the cold, heavy silver in her palm. The guest house. By the bed. The pieces clicked into place with sickening precision. The tension at dinner. The shared glances. Zoe's taunts. Spencer's passivity. Her terrible, restless sleep that night. It wasn't a strange dream. It was her subconscious screaming at her. Her first instinct was denial. There had to be an explanation. Maybe Zoe had lent it to a friend who had stayed there. Maybe she'd dropped it on a previous visit. But she knew. A deep primal intuition, the same one that connected her to the child in her womb, told her the devastating truth. She didn't call Spencer. She called Zoe. "My lighter," Zoe exclaimed when Olivia told her she'd found it. Her voice was a little too bright, a little too relieved. "I've been looking everywhere for that. I must have dropped it last week when I came by to pick up my mail. You're a lifesaver, Liv." Last week, Olivia asked, her voice dangerously calm. "Maria found it this morning, in the guest house bedroom, by the bed." There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line, a silence that stretched for an eternity. "Well," Zoe finally said, her voice losing its breezy tone, becoming sharp and defensive. "The maids must have just gotten around to cleaning in there. You know how big that place is." The lie was so blatant, so insulting, it solidified Olivia's horror into a cold, hard certainty. Maria's team was meticulous. The guest house was cleaned every Tuesday like clockwork. "I see," Olivia said softly, and hung up the phone. She spent the rest of the afternoon in a daze, the silver lighter feeling like a branding iron in her hand. The $10 million estate no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a stage, the setting for a grotesque play in which she was the fool. Every beautiful object, every priceless painting, seemed to mock her. When Spencer came home that evening, she was waiting for him in the great room, sitting in a wing-back chair, the unlit fireplace before her. The lighter was on the mantelpiece, gleaming in the last rays of sunlight. "Long day, my love?" he asked, striding in, loosening his tie. She didn't answer. She just nodded towards the mantelpiece. He followed her gaze and saw the lighter. He froze. For a fraction of a second, raw panic flashed in his eyes before the mask of calm composure slammed back into place. It was the first time she had ever seen him look truly afraid. "What's this?" he asked, his voice a strained immersion of nonchalance. "You tell me, Spencer," she said, her own voice unfamiliar to her ears. It was devoid of warmth, of love, of anything but a chilling emptiness. "It's Zoe's. Maria found it in the guest house. This morning. By the bed." Spencer opened his mouth, 100 lies, no doubt, forming on his tongue. He would blame the maids, blame Zoe's carelessness, perhaps even try to suggest Olivia was being paranoid hormonal. She could see the calculations whirring behind his eyes. He took a step towards her, his face a mask of practiced concern. "Liv, honey, you're jumping to conclusions. Zoe was probably just over there for some reason. You know how she is. She leaves things everywhere." "Don't," Olivia whispered the word, "a blade. Don't you dare lie to me. Don't you dare stand there in this house and treat me like an idiot. I would never." He began, reaching for her hand. "You already have," she interrupted, pulling her hand away as if from a hot stove. Her gaze was steady, unwavering, and for the first time he saw not the heiress, not the soft-hearted girl he had married, but a true daughter of Richard Davenport. He saw steel. "I want you to tell me the truth," she said, her voice rising with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "What were you doing with my sister in that guest house?" Spencer stared at her, the well-rehearsed lines and charming deflections failing him completely. The thread had been pulled, and the entire perfect tapestry of his life was beginning to unravel with terrifying speed. And in his wife's cold, clear eyes, he saw that there was no weaving it back together again. The confrontation with Spencer shattered Olivia's world, but it did not break her. His denials were weak, his explanations flimsy, and his attempts to gaslight her, attributing her accusations to pregnancy-induced paranoia, were so insulting they cauterized the wound of his betrayal, leaving behind not a bleeding gash, but a hard, impenetrable scar. He left for a business trip the next morning, a cowardly retreat designed to let her cool off, as he'd put it. But Olivia didn't cool off. She grew colder, clearer. The emotional tempest gave way to a chilling calm. She packed a small overnight bag, not with designer clothes but with documents. The prenuptial agreement, recent bank statements she'd printed from their joint account, and the silver lighter which she wrapped in a silk handkerchief. She didn't drive to a friend's house or a five-star hotel. She drove to the one place she knew the truth was valued, above all else her father's penthouse on Fifth Avenue. Richard Davenport was a formidable man, built of the same granite and steel as the skyscrapers he financed. He'd built his empire from a modest inheritance into a global powerhouse. He was 70 years old, with eyes that missed nothing and a mind that was always 3 moves ahead. When his daughter arrived unannounced and with a storm in her eyes, he cancelled his afternoon meetings without a second thought. He listened in his study, a room of dark wood leather, and the quiet ticking of a grandfather clock. He listened without interruption as Olivia laid out the story, her voice steady and devoid of tears. She told him about the dinner, the tension, Zoe's taunts, and Spencer's passivity. She placed the silver lighter on his vast mahogany desk. She recounted her phone call with Zoe and the subsequent pathetic confrontation with Spencer. When she finished, the silence in the room was heavy. Richard stared at the lighter, his expression unreadable. Olivia had expected anger, perhaps a thundering rage on her behalf. Instead, he seemed resigned, disappointed, but not surprised. "I am sorry, Olivia," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I am truly sorry that you have been hurt so profoundly. No daughter of mine deserves this." He finally looked up at her, and his eyes were filled not with rage, but with a deep, sorrowful wisdom. "But I cannot say I am shocked." Olivia felt a jolt. "What do you mean?" "You knew I suspected," Richard corrected her gently. "I have always had my reservations about Spencer. He's too polished, too eager. A man that hungry is rarely satisfied with what he is given. He always wants more." He stood and walked to the window, looking down at the river of yellow cabs flowing along the avenue. "Love can be blinding, my dear. I saw how happy he made you, and I hoped my instincts were wrong. I truly did. But a man like me doesn't build an empire on hope. He builds it on diligence." He turned back from the window, his face set like stone. "I never stopped doing my due diligence on Spencer Harrison." This was the first twist of the knife for Olivia. Her father had been investigating her husband. "When I gave him control of Davenport Logistics," Richard continued. "It wasn't just a generous wedding gift. It was a test. A very long, very complex, and very well-monitored test. I gave him enough rope to see if he would build a ladder or hang himself with it." He walked to his desk and unlocked a drawer with a small brass key. He pulled out a thick leather-bound folder and placed it before her. He chose to hang himself. Olivia opened the folder. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just about Zoe. That was merely the sordid emotional icing on a cake of calculated financial treason. The folder was filled with reports from a top-tier private investigative firm. There were photographs, grainy long-lens shots of Spencer meeting Zoe, not just at the guest house, but at discreet city bars and boutique hotels for months. Their affair wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a sustained campaign. But that was just the first section. The second part was far worse. It contained detailed financial forensics, flow charts and bank records that tracked a complex web of shell corporations and offshore accounts. The investigator had uncovered Spencer's secret insurance policy. He had been systematically embezzling funds from Davenport Logistics, siphoning off hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past year. He wasn't just cheating on Olivia. He was stealing from her family. He was trying to build his own war chest with their money. "He was planning to leave you," Richard said, his voice flat and cold. "This wasn't a crime of passion, Olivia. It was a business plan. He and Zoe. They were plotting a takeover of sorts. He thought he could bleed the logistics company dry, build his own capital, and then, I suspect, leverage his position as your husband and the father of my grandchild to demand a greater role, a greater share. The affair with your sister was just leverage. A way to isolate you, perhaps. A partner in his palace coup." Olivia felt sick. The betrayal was so much deeper, so much more calculated than she could have ever imagined. She wasn't just a cheated-on wife. She was a mark, a stepping stone. Her pregnancy, her love, her trust, they were all just assets for him to exploit. "And the house," she whispered, looking up at her father, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. The estate Richard gave a grim, mirthless smile. "Also a test. The deed, the trust it's held in. It's all tied directly to the prenuptial agreement. An agreement which, as you know, contains an exceptionally strict infidelity clause. The moment he was unfaithful, he forfeited any and all claim to any community property. Not that there was much to begin with. The moment he stole from my company, he committed fraud. The estate was never his. It was bait. And he and your sister took it." He closed the folder, the sound echoing in the silent room, like a gavel. "He thinks he's on a business trip. Cooling his heels," Richard said, his eyes now glinting with the cold fire of a predator about to strike. "He has no idea that the game is already over, and he has lost." Olivia looked at her father, truly seeing the depth of his strategic mind for the first time. He hadn't been a passive, disapproving observer. He had been a silent puppeteer, allowing the players to move, knowing all along that he held every string. The Patriarch's gambit was complete. Now all that remained was the checkmate. Spencer Harrison returned from his self-imposed exile 2 days later, feeling confident. He'd given Olivia space. He'd concocted a series of plausible, overlapping lies to explain the lighter. He'd even bought a ridiculously expensive diamond bracelet as a peace offering. He envisioned a tearful reconciliation, where he would admit to being thoughtless but not unfaithful, and she, emotional and pregnant, would eventually relent. He strolled into the main house that afternoon, whistling the velvet box heavy in his pocket. The house was unnervingly quiet. He found Olivia not in their bedroom, but in the formal drawing room, a cavernous space reserved for major holidays and her father's most important guests. She was sitting on a brocade sofa, dressed in a simple but elegant navy dress. She was the picture of composure. Across from her, in one of the high-backed armchairs, sat Richard Davenport. His presence hit Spencer like a physical blow. Richard Spencer said, forcing a smile. "What a surprise. I didn't know you were coming over." "Sit down, Spencer," Richard said. His voice was not angry, but it held a chilling lack of warmth. It was the voice he used in a boardroom, just before dismantling a rival company. Spencer's confidence began to evaporate. He looked at Olivia, but her face was a beautiful cold mask. She wouldn't meet his eyes. Just as he was about to sit, a side door opened, and Zoe walked in. She looked nervous, her usual defiant glamour replaced by a brittle anxiety. She shot a panicked glance at Spencer before taking a seat at the far end of the room, as far from her sister as possible. "A family meeting, I see." Spencer attempted his voice, a little too loud in the silent room. "What's the occasion?" "The occasion," Richard began, leaning forward slightly, "is the end of a charade." He gestured to the large mahogany coffee table. On it, fanned out like a losing poker hand, were photographs. The first one Spencer saw was a crystal-clear image of him and Zoe kissing on the patio of the guest house. Another showed them entering a hotel in Midtown. Another and another. Spencer's blood turned to ice water. "Where did you get these?" he stammered, his mind racing. "Let's call it quality control," Richard said flatly. He then slid a second set of documents across the table. Bank statements from a bank in the Cayman Islands, wire transfer confirmations, a detailed breakdown of the shell corporation Spencer had so carefully constructed. And this, let's call it an audit. Spencer stared at the proof of his embezzlement laid bare on the table. There was no denying it. It was all there. Every stolen dollar, every secret transaction. The floor fell out from under him. He was exposed utterly and completely. He looked at Zoe, a desperate, silent plea for an ally, but she was staring at the financial documents, her face pale with shock. She had known about the affair, she had encouraged the ambition, but she clearly had not known the extent of his financial crimes. She realized in that moment that he was just as willing to deceive her as he was Olivia. I can explain." Spencer began, the words catching in his throat. This was a nightmare. He was supposed to be in control. "No, you can't," Olivia said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was clear and strong, resonating with an authority he had never heard from her before. "There is no explanation for this. There is only the truth. You married me under false pretenses. You betrayed my trust, you betrayed our vows, and you stole from my family. You plotted with my own sister against me while I was carrying your child." She stood up, her pregnancy no longer a sign of vulnerability, but a symbol of the future he had just forfeited. "The man I thought I loved never existed. He was a fiction you created to get your hands on all of this." She swept her arm, indicating the opulent room. "But you misunderstood something crucial, Spencer. You don't get this. You were never going to get this." It was then that Zoe, realizing she had been played by everyone, finally broke. She shot to her feet, her face contorted with fury, not at her father or her sister, but at Spencer. "You told me it was about us," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at him. "You told me we were going to build something together. You didn't tell me you were just a common thief. You used me. You used me to get to her. To get to him." "That's not true." Spencer fired back, his desperation making him reckless. "This was your idea as much as mine. You hated her perfect life. You wanted to see her fall." The ugly truth of their conspiracy filled the room, a poison gas of jealousy and greed. They tore into each other, hurling accusations, revealing the petty resentments and ruthless ambitions that had fueled their affair. Olivia and Richard watched the implosion in silence, their expressions a mixture of disgust and vindication. Finally, Richard stood, and the sheer force of his presence silenced them both. "Enough," he commanded. "The time for lies is over." He turned his cold gaze on Spencer. "Your employment at Davenport Logistics is terminated, effective immediately. A team is at the office right now, securing your files. A full criminal complaint for fraud and embezzlement will be filed with the district attorney's office on Monday morning. I suggest you find a very good lawyer." He then looked at Zoe, and for the first time, a flicker of pain crossed his features. "As for you, Zoe, you conspired against your own flesh and blood. You are a disgrace to this family's name. Your trust fund will be frozen. You are no longer welcome in this house or in any of my properties. You are for all intents and purposes on your own. Perhaps you will finally learn the value of something you didn't inherit." Zoe stared at him aghast, before her face crumpled in defeat. Richard's final gaze fell upon Spencer, who stood shaking in the middle of the room. Two large, impassive men in dark suits suddenly entered from the hall. "My security will escort you to your room," Richard stated. "You will pack one bag with your personal effects. Anything you acquired after your marriage to my daughter will remain. You will then be escorted off this property. If you ever attempt to contact Olivia or my family again, I will use the full weight of my resources to ensure you spend the rest of your miserable life regretting it. Now get out of my house." The reckoning was swift, brutal, and absolute. Spencer Harrison, the man who flew too close to the sun, was cast out. He was no longer the lord of the manor, but a trespasser being evicted with nothing to his name but a bag of clothes and the promise of a prison cell. He was led away, not even daring to look back at the woman whose life he had so carelessly tried to destroy. The months that followed the reckoning were a quiet reconstruction. The lawsuit against Spencer moved forward with the relentless, grinding efficiency of the Davenport legal machine. Stripped of his ill-gotten funds and abandoned by anyone of influence, he was a pariah. His name appeared in the business pages not as a rising star, but as a cautionary tale of fraud and disgrace. The last Olivia heard, he had accepted a plea bargain to avoid a longer sentence, his future a bleak landscape of courtrooms and restitution payments. Zoe vanished. Cut off from the family fortune, she disappeared into the anonymity of the world she had always pretended to embrace. There were whispers she was somewhere in Europe, trying to leverage old contacts. But the Davenport name, once her golden ticket, was now a door slammed shut in her face. She had wanted to be free of her family's shadow, and in the cruelest of ironies, she had gotten her wish. For Olivia, healing was not a single event, but a slow daily process. In the late fall, as the leaves on the estate turned to fire and gold, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Andrew after her maternal grandfather, a man of quiet integrity. Holding her son in the sun-drenched nursery that had once been a symbol of a shared dream, Olivia felt a profound shift. The magnificent house no longer felt like a gilded cottage or a stage for betrayal. It felt like home. Her home. Her son's birthright. The walls, once silent witnesses to her pain, now seemed to stand as ramparts protecting her and the new life she held. Her father was a constant, gentle presence. He visited several times a week, not as Richard Davenport, the titan of industry, but as Grandpa Richard. He would hold Andrew, his formidable face softening as the baby's tiny hand curled around his finger. He never spoke of Spencer or Zoe unless Olivia brought them up. He was focused on the future, on the new Davenport heir. One crisp afternoon, As she and her father walked the grounds, pushing Andrew in his stroller, Olivia stopped and looked back at the great house. "I used to feel so small here," she confessed, her voice soft, "like I was just a temporary resident, like none of it was really mine." And now Richard asked his eyes on her face. Now, she said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "I know it is. Not because of the deed or the trust, but because this is my son's legacy. It's my responsibility to protect it, to fill it with strength and honesty, not secrets and lies." She had learned a brutal lesson, that the greatest betrayals often come from those closest to us, cloaked in smiles and promises. But from the ashes of that betrayal, she had found a strength she never knew she possessed. She was no longer the naive girl who had fallen for a charming facade. She was a mother. She was a survivor. She was the matriarch of the house, not by marriage, but by right. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. The house stood proud and strong against the twilight sky. It was a $10 million estate, a symbol of immense wealth and power. But for the first time, Olivia understood its true value. It wasn't in the marble or the manicured lawns. It was in the promise of a different dawn, a future she would build herself and for her son, on a foundation of unbreakable truth. 3 years passed. On the surface, the world of the Greenwich estate was one of idyllic tranquility. The seasons turned, painting the lush grounds in hues of vibrant green, fiery orange, and serene white. Andrew was now a boisterous 3-year-old, with his mother's bright eyes and a boundless energy that filled the great house with laughter, chasing away the last of the stubborn ghosts. Olivia had settled into her role with a grace and competence that surprised everyone but her father. She managed her inheritance, sat on the boards of 2 prominent children's charities, and most importantly, she was a present and devoted mother. The scar of Spencer's betrayal had faded, no longer an aching wound, but a silvery reminder of the strength she had discovered in its wake. The story was, by all accounts, over. But the past is never truly gone. It is merely patient. The Echo arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in a plain, cream-colored envelope addressed not to the estate, but to the administrative office of one of her charities. It was a formal letter from the social work department of St. Jude's Public Hospital in the Bronx. The language was sterile, bureaucratic. It informed her that a patient, Miss Zoe Davenport, had been admitted in critical condition. She had listed Olivia as her next of kin. She was alone, and her prognosis was terminal. Olivia read the letter 3 times, the clinical words blurring into a nauseating haze. Zoe. The name was a spectre from another life. After the reckoning, Olivia had willfully and successfully purged her sister from her thoughts. To hear her name again attached to words like critical and terminal sent a disorienting shock through her system. The sterile hospital notice felt more violent than a scream. She immediately called her father. Richard's response was exactly what she expected: pragmatic, protective, and utterly devoid of sentiment. "Leave it alone, Olivia," he advised, his voice firm over the phone. "Send the hospital's administrator an anonymous donation for her care, if you must. But do not go there. Do not see her. She is not your responsibility. She forfeited that right 3 years ago. She's dying, Dad. And she's alone. She made herself alone." Richard countered, his tone hardening. "This is the consequence of her choices. Do not mistake this for anything other than what it is, a final, desperate gambit. She wants something. Forgiveness money, a scene. Don't allow her to poison your peace, not after you've worked so hard to build it. A few years ago, Olivia would have agreed, deferring to his wisdom. But the woman her father was speaking to was not the same woman who had run to his penthouse seeking refuge. That woman was gone. This isn't about what she wants, Olivia said, her voice quiet but resolute. This is about what I need to do. I can't let her die like that in a public ward with no one. It's not who I am. It is who she made you become. Smarter, stronger, and more careful, he argued. And more compassionate, I hope, Olivia added softly. I have to go, Dad. For me, not for her. The silence on the other end of the line was long, but when he spoke again, the steel in his voice had been replaced by a reluctant understanding. Your security detail will go with you. To the door. Not a step farther without your express permission. Call me the moment you leave. The drive to the Bronx was a journey across worlds. The manicured perfection of Greenwich dissolved into the grit and relentless motion of the city. St. Jude's was a large, aging brick building, its halls humming with a weary, perpetual motion. The air smelled of antiseptic and quiet suffering. It was the complete antithesis of the curated, silent luxury of the Davenport estate. Zoe was in a semi-private room at the end of a long, dimly lit corridor. The woman in the bed bore only a passing resemblance to the sharp, glamorous sister Olivia remembered. The vibrant dark hair was gone, replaced by a sparse, patchy down. Her skin, once glowing with expensive treatments, was sallow and stretched thin over her bones. The only thing that remained of the old Zoe was in her eyes. When they flickered open and saw Olivia standing in the doorway, they still held a glint of their old, defiant fire, now banked by pain and exhaustion. So Zoe rasped a dry, rattling sound. The Queen descends from her castle to visit the dungeon. Olivia stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind her. She pulled a visitor's chair to the bedside, the legs scraping noisily on the linoleum. The social worker called me Zoe. They said you were dying. Zoe finished the sentence for her, a grim smirk twisting her lips. Don't be shy, Liv. We're past pretending now, aren't we, Pancreatic? By the time they found it, it had already bought real estate everywhere else. They sat in an uncomfortable silence, the beeping of a machine the only sound. Olivia didn't know what to say. I'm sorry, felt hollow. I forgive you, felt like a lie. Why did you call me, Olivia? Finally asked. Zoe's gaze drifted to the grimy window, which offered a view of a brick wall. I ran out of money about a year ago. Ran out of friends 6 months after that. Turns out, the Davenport name is only useful when it's attached to a bank account. I came back here thinking... I don't know what I was thinking. I got sick. And when they ask you who your emergency contact is, you start thinking about the people you're actually connected to. By blood. Whether you like it or not. She turned her head on the pillow, her eyes pinning Olivia with a startling intensity. I didn't call you for your money, Olivia, or your pity. I called you because there's one last piece of the story you don't know, one last debt I owe you. I don't want anything from you, Zoe. You'll want this. Zoe insisted, her voice gaining a sliver of its old strength. It's about him. About Spencer. She coughed a deep, painful spasm that shook her frail body. When she recovered, she continued. After it all went down, I was adrift and angry. Angry at you, at Dad, but most of all at him. He played me just as much as he played you. So I started digging, hired a cheap PI with the last of my money. I wanted something to destroy him, with something more than what Dad already had. Olivia felt a cold dread creep up her spine. What did you find? You think Spencer started his life when he got that scholarship to Michigan State? That he was just some ambitious kid from a working-class family? Zoe gave a weak, rattling laugh. That was Act 2. His whole life before that. He burned it to the ground. He had a different name. Scott Peterson. And he wasn't just some kid. He was a husband and a father. The words hit Olivia with the force of a physical blow. She felt the air leave her lungs. Spencer. A father. Before Andrew. In a little town outside of Ann Arbor. Zoe whispered, her energy fading fast. A wife named Sarah. A daughter named Molly. He drained their savings, took out loans in her name, and then he just vanished. Changed his name, created a new identity, and went looking for a bigger prize. He didn't just climb the ladder, Liv. He built it out of the bones of the people he left behind. With a trembling hand, Zoe reached under her pillow and pulled out a crumpled, worn envelope. She pushed it across the blanket towards Olivia. It's all in there, she breathed, exhausted from the effort. Her name, the town, a picture of the girl. I held on to it, thinking maybe I'd use it someday. But it's no use to me now. It's a debt, the truth. It's the only thing I have left to give you. He wasn't just a bad husband to you. He was never a husband at all. He's a black hole. He consumes everything. Olivia stared at the envelope, her mind reeling. This new betrayal was somehow worse than the affair, worse than the embezzlement. It was a complete negation of the man she thought she knew, revealing the hollow sociopathic core beneath. He hadn't just deceived her. He was a phantom, a construct. She finally looked at Zoe, and for the first time she felt a wave of profound, aching pity. Her sister's entire life had been a furious, desperate reaction to the golden cage she was born into. She had attached herself to a man who was the human embodiment of a lie, and he had destroyed her as casually as he destroyed everyone else. Olivia stood up. She didn't take the envelope yet. She walked to the door and spoke quietly to the security guard outside. She made a call to her father's personal physician, giving quiet, clear instructions. Arrangements were to be made. A private room in a top-tier palliative care facility. The best comfort care money could buy. All paid for anonymously. It was not an act of forgiveness. It was an act of closure. An obligation not of a sister, but of a human being to ensure another did not die alone in a place like this. When she returned to the room, she picked up the envelope from the bed. Zoe watched her, her eyes wet with tears. She was too weak to shed. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Olivia walked out of the hospital and into the fresh, cool air of the late afternoon. The envelope clutched in her hand. Back at the estate, she found Andrew playing on the great lawn with his nanny, his delighted shrieks echoing in the twilight. She watched him, her beautiful, innocent son who shared the blood of a monster. But looking at him, she knew. Spencer's legacy wasn't blood. It was a pattern of erasure and deceit, and that was a pattern that would end with her. She held the envelope, the full and terrible truth of her past, in one hand. With the other, she would guide her son toward a future of honesty and light. The knowledge didn't weaken her. It armed her. It was the final ghost, and now she had the power to banish it forever. So what becomes of a life built on a foundation of lies? as we saw in the story of Spencer Harrison. The collapse is not just inevitable, it's absolute. He chased the illusion of power only to find himself with nothing. His betrayal aimed at the heart of a family ultimately only poisoned himself and his co-conspirator, Zoe. But for Olivia, the story isn't one of victimhood. It's a powerful testament to resilience. She transformed the deepest heartbreak into a source of unshakable strength, emerging not as a scorned wife, but as a formidable matriarch, ready to command her own destiny and protect her child's legacy. What would you have done in Olivia's shoes? Could you have seen the warning signs? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Every family has its secrets, and stories like this remind us that true wealth is never about money, but about trust and integrity. If this story moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who loves a story of justice and resilience. And make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will leave you thinking long after the story ends. The sterile white walls of a hospital are meant to be a place of healing, of new beginnings. But for one woman, 8 months pregnant and filled with hope, they became the backdrop to a nightmare. She was there for a routine checkup, a final look at the tiny life growing inside her. As she waited for her husband in the bustling cafeteria, the sound of his familiar, hearty laugh reached her ears. But he wasn't alone, and the words that followed his laughter were a venom that seeped into her soul, shattering her world more completely than any medical diagnosis ever could. This is the story of how a single overheard conversation ignited a fire of vengeance, exposing a web of lies so deep no one would escape the flames. The air in the St. Michael's Hospital cafeteria was thick with the scent of lukewarm coffee and antiseptic. It was a symphony of muffled conversations, the clatter of plastic trays, and the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum, the mundane soundtrack of anxiety and relief. Olivia Hayes sat at a small table near the ficus tree in the corner, one hand resting protectively on the taut drum of her stomach. At 34 weeks, every movement of the baby inside her was a miracle, a tiny fluttering reassurance that everything was going to be okay. Her checkup with Dr. Albright had been perfect. Strong heartbeat, ideal positioning. A textbook pregnancy from here on out, Olivia, the doctor, had said with a warm smile. Just try to relax and keep your stress levels down. Relax. It was all she wanted to do. She'd been waiting for her husband, Alistair Sterling, for 20 minutes. He was supposed to meet her here after the appointment, a rare weekday gesture he'd insisted upon. A celebratory lunch, he'd called it. Alistair was a man who dealt in grand gestures. The penthouse apartment overlooking the city, the surprise trips to Paris, the custom-designed nursery waiting for their son Mason. Alistair Sterling, the charismatic real estate magnate who had built an empire from the ground up, knew how to create a perfect picture. Olivia, an architect by trade, before her high-risk status put her on mandatory bed rest, had once loved being the centerpiece of that picture. A wave of nausea, more from hunger than morning sickness, washed over her. She decided to get a bottle of water while she waited. As she pushed her chair back, the distinct sound of Alistair's laugh, a deep, booming sound that could fill any room, cut through the cafeteria's din. A smile touched her lips. He was here. She turned, expecting to see him striding towards her, his tailored suit immaculate, his smile disarming. Instead, she saw him at a table across the room, partially obscured by a pillar. He wasn't alone. He was leaning in close to a woman, a striking redhead, in a sharp crimson dress that seemed far too glamorous for a hospital cafeteria. Olivia recognized her instantly. Scarlett Davenport, a junior analyst from Alistair's firm. He'd mentioned her a few times, praising her ruthless ambition. Olivia froze her hand still on the back of her chair. They looked so comfortable, so intimate. Scarlett laughed, a high, tinkling sound, and playfully slapped Alistair's arm. Olivia felt a prickle of unease. It was probably nothing. A business meeting. But here, why hadn't he just told her he was with a colleague? She took a half step back, nestling herself into the relative cover of the fake plant. Curiosity, cold and sharp, overrode her initial instinct to walk over. She needed to understand what she was seeing. The acoustics of the high-ceilinged room were surprisingly clear. And then she actually asked if the paint in the nursery was non-toxic. Scarlett said, her voice dripping with mockery. She took a delicate sip of her espresso, as if a little lead would be the worst thing for it. Alistair chuckled again, that same booming laugh that now sounded grating and cruel to Olivia's ears. You have to understand Scarlett. She thinks of everything in terms of risks. High-risk pregnancy, high-risk investments, it's exhausting. It's like living with an insurance adjuster. The bottle of water Olivia had been about to buy was forgotten. Her blood ran cold. He was talking about her. They were laughing about her. Scarlett leaned in further, her red hair brushing his shoulder. Well, I hope for your sake the little heir doesn't come out with her anxiety. Can you imagine a sterling who's afraid to take a risk? There's a contingency plan for that. Alistair said, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial murmur, but Olivia heard every single word. A trust fund, a good boarding school, and a therapist on retainer. It's the sterling way of dealing with disappointments. Disappointments. The word echoed in the sudden silence of Olivia's mind. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a dismissal. Her, their son, their entire life together, reduced to a potential disappointment, to be managed and outsourced. The 9 months of careful dieting, the endless doctor's appointments, the fear and the hope she carried every single day, it was all a joke to him. A punchline he was sharing with his mistress over coffee. Scarlett's perfectly manicured hand found Alistair's on the table. And what about her? What's the contingency plan for the insurance adjuster? Alistair's smile was a predatory slash. He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers with hers. Olivia is comfortable. She enjoys the life I provide. She won't ever risk that. She's too practical, too boring. He squeezed Scarlett's hand. Unlike you, you're an asset. She, my darling, has become a liability. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Olivia's feet. Liability. Disappointment. She backed away slowly, her movements stiff and robotic. She bumped into a cart of trays, the rattle barely registering. Neither Alistair nor Scarlett looked up. They were in their own world, a bubble of shared cruelty and contempt. She stumbled back to her table, her heart hammering against her ribs with a force that felt dangerous. The baby kicked a sharp, sudden jab, as if he too could feel the poison that had just entered their lives. She grabbed her purse, her hands shaking so violently she could barely close the clasp. She had to get out. She walked one foot in front of the other, focusing on the exit sign at the far end of the cafeteria. It glowed a lurid red, a beacon in the haze of her shock. She didn't look back. She couldn't. If she saw his face again, she knew she would either shatter into a million pieces or do something she would regret. Out in the cool afternoon air, she leaned against the brick wall of the hospital, gasping for breath. The city noise, the traffic, the sirens, the chatter of people passing by was a deafening roar. Dr. Albright's words came back to her. Keep your stress levels down. A single, tearless sob escaped her lips. It wasn't a sob of sadness. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. He hadn't just broken her heart. He had insulted her intelligence. He had mocked their unborn child. He thought she was a liability. He thought she was boring and practical. He had no idea how practical she could be. He had no idea the risks she was willing to take when something she loved was threatened. He had built an empire on calculated risks. Now she would become the one variable he had never, ever planned for. The picture he had so carefully painted was about to be ripped to shreds, and she would be the one holding the blade. The elevator ride up to the penthouse felt like an ascent into a foreign country. The polished brass, the mirrored walls reflecting her pale, drawn face, the soft chime announcing their arrival at the top floor. It all felt like a set from a play she no longer had a part in. The key turning in the lock was unnaturally loud in the silence. She walked into the sprawling apartment, a monument to Alistair's success and her own design aesthetic. She had chosen every piece of furniture selected, every shade of paint, curated every piece of art. It was supposed to be a sanctuary, a home. Now it felt like a gilded cage, each beautiful object a reminder of the lie she had been living. Her gaze fell on a framed photo on the console table, the two of them in Santorini, Alistair's arm around her, both of them beaming at the camera. She had believed in that smile. She had built her life around it. An hour later, Alistair came home. He walked in whistling a bouquet of Olivia's favourite lilies in his hand. The hypocrisy was so staggering it almost made her laugh. "There you are," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I'm so sorry, darling. I got held up in the most dreadful last-minute meeting. I was worried when you didn't answer your phone." He moved to kiss her. Olivia turned her head, and his lips met her cheek. He paused, sensing the chill. "Everything all right? How was Dr. Albright?" "The doctor was fine," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. She looked at the lilies. "Who were you having coffee with, Alistair?" The question was so direct, so out of character for the non-confrontational woman he believed her to be, that it momentarily threw him. A flicker of something annoyance panic crossed his face before the mask of charming husband slipped back into place. "I told you a meeting," he said, setting the flowers down on the marble countertop, "with Robert Feldman about the new downtown tower. Terribly dry stuff. You would have been bored to tears. He was a phenomenal liar. Effortless. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, it was clear this was not his first performance. Robert Feldman." Olivia repeated her voice, still unnervingly calm. "That's strange, because from where I was sitting, Robert Feldman looked a lot like Scarlett Davenport, and she was wearing a red dress." Silence. The hum of the sub-zero refrigerator was the only sound in the cavernous kitchen. Alistair's smile finally vanished. He ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair, his posture shifting from relaxed to rigid. "Olivia, you're jumping to conclusions." He began his tone, shifting to one of patient condescension. "Scarlett is a bright young analyst. I'm mentoring her. Her father is an old acquaintance. It was a quick public meeting about quarterly projections. You're pregnant, your hormones are all over the place. You can't get worked up over nothing. Gaslighting. The classic first defense. He was trying to make her doubt her own reality. But she had the clarity of the newly brutally awakened. My hormones aren't making me hear things, Alistair. I heard you. I heard both of you." She took a step closer, her eyes locked on his. "I heard you call our son a potential disappointment. I heard you talk about contingency plans and boarding schools. I heard you call me a liability." Each word was a stone she threw at him, chipping away at his composure. The color drained from his face. He knew he was caught. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. His expression hardened into something she had never seen before, cold, dismissive, and utterly devoid of remorse. The charming millionaire was gone, and in his place was a ruthless stranger. "So you heard," he said, with a shrug, his voice laced with ice. "Fine. Let's stop the charade, then. Yes, I am seeing Scarlett, and yes, she offers a level of excitement and intellectual partnership that has been missing from this marriage for a very long time." The casual cruelty of it stole her breath. "A long time I'm carrying your child, Alistair. I have given up my career, my body, my entire life for the last year, to bring your son into this world safely. And you've been compensated handsomely for it, haven't you?" He sneered, gesturing around the opulent room. "Don't act the martyr, Olivia. This has always been a transaction. You wanted security of family. I wanted a beautiful stable hostess and an heir. You fulfilled your part of the bargain. Now you're becoming tedious. The constant worrying, the endless complaints. It's draining." The word transaction struck her harder than liability. He was recasting their entire relationship, their love story, as a business deal. It was a desperate, vicious attempt to absolve himself of guilt, to paint her as a gold digger who had simply reached the end of her contract. "So what now?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly for the first time, not with fear, but with a seismic rage that was building deep within her. "Do you and Scarlett move in here after I'm gone? Do you tell our son his mother was just a tedious transaction?" Alistair actually laughed. It was a short, sharp, ugly sound. "Don't be so dramatic. Nothing has to change. You have your life, your comforts. I'll be more discreet. You'll have the baby, you'll be a wonderful mother, and you'll have all the financial support you could ever dream of. I will not have my reputation tarnished by a messy public divorce, especially not with the Sterling Tower project at a critical phase. You will stay here and you will play your part." It wasn't a request. It was an order. He was dictating the terms of her imprisonment. He truly believed her to be so weak, so dependent on his wealth, that she would accept this humiliating arrangement. He thought he held all the cards. That was his second mistake of the day. Olivia looked at the man she had once loved, the man she had promised to spend her life with, and felt nothing but a profound, chilling emptiness. The love had been burned out of her in the hospital cafeteria. All that was left were ashes and resolve. "No," she said the word quiet, but absolute. "No. What do you mean?" "No," he scoffed. "Where would you go?" "Back to your parents' little suburban house." "Don't be ridiculous, Olivia. You're not built for that life anymore." "You're right," she agreed, a strange, cold smile touching her lips. "I'm not built for that life. I'm built for more." Without another word, she turned and walked towards the bedroom. He followed her, his voice rising in anger and disbelief. "What are you doing, Olivia?" "Stop this foolishness. We can work this out. Think about the baby." "Oh, I am," she said, pulling a pre-packed suitcase from the back of the walk-in closet, a just-in-case hospital bag that was about to serve a very different purpose. "I am thinking only of him, and he will not be raised in a house with a man who considers him a potential disappointment." She packed only the essentials, her laptop, a folder of personal documents, toiletries, a few changes of comfortable clothes. She left the designer gowns, the expensive jewelry, the entire wardrobe of Mrs. Alistair Sterling, hanging in the closet like the shed skin of a life she was leaving behind. When she walked back into the living room, he was standing by the door, blocking her path. His face was a thunderous mask of fury. "You are not leaving this apartment," he said through gritted teeth. "I forbid it." Olivia looked him straight in the eye, her gaze unwavering. "You don't get to forbid me from doing anything ever again. You think my world revolves around your money. You think that because I was designing homes instead of corporate towers, I'm not as smart, not as capable as you. You think I'm just a pretty accessory you acquired." She took a deep breath. "You made a transaction, Alistair. You just miscalculated the value of the asset you were trying to liquidate. Now get out of my way." There was a new authority in her voice he had never heard. It wasn't hysterical or emotional. It was the calm, measured tone of a person who had absolutely nothing left to lose, and therefore nothing to fear. He saw it in her eyes, the fire, the intelligence he had once claimed to admire, now honed to a razor's edge and aimed directly at him. For a moment, he seemed to consider physically stopping her, but something in her stance, in the sheer force of her will, made him hesitate. He slowly, reluctantly stepped aside. As she walked past him and out the door, she didn't look back. She didn't slam the door. She simply pulled it closed, the soft click echoing the final, irrevocable end of her old life. She was Olivia Hayes again, and her new project was not building a home, but tearing an empire down to its very foundations. The first 48 hours were a blur of logistics and adrenaline. Olivia didn't go to her parents. Alistair was right about one thing: he would look for her there, and she couldn't subject them to his brand of coercive charm or veiled threats. Instead, she checked into a nondescript extended-stay hotel in a quiet neighborhood she'd scouted for a client years ago. It was clean, anonymous, and offered free Wi-Fi. It was her new headquarters. Grief came in waves, sharp and unexpected. In the quiet of the night, the memory of his laugh in the cafeteria would surface, and she would have to physically hold herself together, breathing through the pain for the sake of the baby. But she didn't allow herself to wallow. Grief was a luxury she couldn't afford. Anger was fuel, and she had a surplus. She spent the first day securing her independence. She had always maintained a separate bank account, a holdover from her freelance days that Alistair had mockingly called her Little Hobby Fund. It contained a modest but respectable sum enough to live on for months if she was careful. She called her bank, added new security protocols, and transferred the funds to a new account at a different institution. She bought a burn phone. She was cutting the digital ties that bound her to him. On the third day, she made the most important call of her new life. "Benjamin Carter, please." Benjamin Carter was a name she'd filed away years ago. He was a partner at a boutique law firm, a quiet shark known for taking on complex, high-stakes corporate litigation. He was the polar opposite of Alistair's army of aggressive, loud corporate lawyers. Carter was known for his precision, his ethics, and his uncanny ability to find the single thread that could unravel an entire company. Olivia had met him once at a charity gala and had been impressed by his quiet intelligence. "This is Ben Carter." His voice was calm and steady. "Mr. Carter, my name is Olivia Hayes. We met briefly a few years ago at the Children's Literacy Gala. I'm in need of legal counsel regarding a sensitive domestic and financial situation." There was a brief pause. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, his tone neutral, but acknowledging he knew exactly who she was. "I see. I have an opening at 4 p.m. today, if you're able to come to my office." His office was a testament to his personality. It was located in a beautifully restored historic building, filled with books, modern art, and clean lines. There was no opulent mahogany or intimidating decor. It was a space designed for thinking. Ben Carter was in his late 40s with kind eyes that belied a formidable intellect. He listened without interruption as Olivia laid out the entire story from the cafeteria to the final confrontation. She didn't cry. She presented the facts with the cool precision of an architect detailing a building's structural flaws. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "He said you were a liability," he mused. In my experience, when arrogant men start assigning financial terms to human beings, it's because their own finances are not as stable as they appear. They project their own vulnerabilities onto others. A spark of hope ignited in Olivia's chest. You think he's in trouble? Men like Alistair Sterling don't build empires that quickly without cutting corners or taking on massive, unsustainable debt, Carter explained. His public image is his greatest asset. A messy divorce, as he noted, would be a problem. But a divorce that uncovers financial impropriety, that would be a catastrophe for him. He leaned forward, his expression serious. Olivia, I need to be clear. Divorcing a man with his resources will be a war. He will play dirty. He will try to paint you as unstable a gold digger. He will use your pregnancy, your pre-bed rest career, everything he can to discredit you. I know, Olivia said, her voice firm. But he made a mistake. He told me I was tedious and practical. He's right about the practical part. For 7 years, I've been his wife. I've balanced the household accounts. I've reviewed the investment portfolios with him. I've sat through endless dinners with his bankers and partners. I didn't just listen. I paid attention. He thought I was just nodding and smiling, but I was learning. This was her thesis, the foundation of her new plan. Alistair had seen her as decor, but she had been a silent apprentice. I remember things, she continued, her mind racing, connecting dots that had once seemed random. Late-night calls he tried to hide, trips that were suddenly cancelled, names of shell corporations he mentioned once, and then never again. There was a project in South America, the Viridian Deal, that went bust. He lost a fortune, but it never appeared on any official statements. He said he'd buried it. Carter's eyes lit up with a hunter's gleam. Burying a multi-million-dollar loss is not something one does legally. Olivia, this is exactly what we need. Specifics, names, dates, projects. He keeps a private ledger. She said, the memory surfacing with sudden clarity. Not on any company server. On a black, encrypted hard drive he keeps in the safe behind the Jericho print in his home office. He called it his legacy insurance. Carter's pen flew across his legal pad. Getting that would be the holy grail, but also nearly impossible without a court order which we can't get, without substantial proof to begin with. Maybe there's another way, Olivia murmured, thinking. As an architect, she knew blueprints. She knew systems. And she knew the security system of her own home because she had helped design it. She knew its blind spots, its access codes, the timing of the security patrols. I need you to file for divorce, Olivia said, her resolve hardening into steel. File it on the grounds of irreconcilable differences and infidelity. That will be the opening salvo. It will force his hand. He'll react, and when he does, he'll make a mistake. Arrogant men always do. And in the meantime, Carter asked, in the meantime, you start digging into the Viridian Deal. Look for any regulatory filings, any partners who might be disgruntled. I'll make a list of every name, every project, every whispered conversation I can remember. She stood up, extending her hand. He called me a liability, Mr. Carter. I'm going to become the most expensive liability he's ever had on his books. As she shook his hand, Ben Carter saw not a scorned wife, but a brilliant strategist. He had a feeling this would be one of the most remarkable cases of his career. Leaving his office, Olivia felt a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She was no longer just a pregnant woman fleeing a broken marriage. She was an architect, and she was drawing up the blueprints for Alistair Sterling's demolition. The first step was to cause a tremor in his foundation. The divorce filing would be that tremor, and she knew with absolute certainty it was only the beginning. The divorce papers landed on Alistair Sterling's desk like a declaration of war. He had been in a board meeting, charming investors with projections of staggering growth for the Sterling Tower. When his assistant handed him the legal summons, his public face, of affable power, barely flickered. But inside a volcano of rage erupted. His first call was to Olivia. It went directly to the voicemail of a disconnected number. His second was to her parents, who truthfully and fearfully told him they had no idea where she was. His third was to his lead attorney, a bulldog named Harrison Croft. "She's bluffing," Alistair snarled into the phone, pacing his office. "She has nothing. Find her. Freeze her accounts. I want her to come crawling back with nothing but the clothes on her back. The joint accounts are frozen," Croft reported grimly. "But she has a private account we can't touch without a court order. She's smarter than you gave her credit for, Alistair. And this lawyer she's hired, Benjamin Carter. He's not an ambulance chaser. He's meticulous. He doesn't take cases he can't win." The news only fueled Alistair's fury. He had underestimated her. It was a galling, infuriating realization. He found a strange sort of comfort with Scarlett. She was his echo chamber, validating his anger, stroking his ego. "She's ungrateful," Scarlett murmured that evening, tracing the rim of her wine glass, as they sat in a private booth at an exclusive restaurant. "After everything you've given her. Some people just don't appreciate fine things." "It's the timing that's killing me," Alistair confessed, loosening his tie. "The tower financing is at a knife's edge. We need one more major investor to close the final round. Any hint of public scandal, and they could get spooked." "Then we fight back," Scarlett said, her eyes gleaming. "You said it yourself, she's an emotional, hormonal pregnant woman. We can use that. We can leak stories, that she's unstable, that her departure was erratic. We create a narrative that makes her look like the villain." Alistair looked at her, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "You really are ruthless, aren't you?" "I learned from the best," she purred, leaning in to kiss him. But even as he embraced her, a seed of paranoia had been planted. Olivia wasn't acting like the timid woman he knew. She was acting like someone with a plan. Someone who knew something. The thought of the black hard drive in his safe gnawed at him. It was his greatest secret and his ultimate vulnerability. Meanwhile, in her quiet hotel room, Olivia was transforming into a forensic accountant of her own past. With Ben Carter's guidance, she created a vast mind map on her wall, using colored index cards and string. It was a web of names, dates, and connections. The Viridian deal was at the center. "Okay, Viridian," she said over the phone to Ben staring at the wall. The partner he mentioned was a man named Michael Corrigan. Alistair said Corrigan was old school and got cold feet, pulling out at the last minute and collapsing the deal. Alistair claimed Corrigan's company went bankrupt shortly after. "I'm looking into it," Ben said, his voice crackling with excitement on the other end. "Corrigan Holdings did declare bankruptcy 8 years ago. But the interesting part is what I found in the court filings. Corrigan sued a series of unnamed entities for corporate sabotage just before he went under. He claimed they'd deliberately fed him bad geological data to scare him off the investment, only to try and scoop up the land rights themselves. The case was dismissed for lack of evidence. Corporate sabotage. That sounds exactly like something Alistair would do," Olivia whispered. "Can you find this Michael Corrigan?" "He fell off the map after the bankruptcy," Ben said. "Lost everything. Last known address was a rental in a different state. It'll take some time." While Ben hunted for the ghost of Michael Corrigan, Olivia focused on a different angle, Scarlett Davenport. There was something about her that didn't sit right beyond the obvious. Alistair had said her father was an old acquaintance. It was a vague, dismissive term. Using her old architectural firm's research database access, Olivia started digging. Scarlett Davenport, summa cum laude, Wharton School of Business, an impeccable resume. But her digital footprint before college was curiously thin. Olivia went deeper, cross-referencing names and locations. She searched for Davenport in connection with Alistair's past business dealings. Nothing. Then she had an idea. She stopped searching for Davenport and started searching for Scarlett's face. She ran her corporate headshot through advanced facial recognition software, a tool her firm sometimes used to verify the identities of international clients. She cross-referenced the results with public records yearbooks and old news articles. For days, she found nothing but dead ends. She was about to give up when a single grainy image popped up. It was a local news photo from 8 years ago, accompanying an article about the Corrigan Holdings bankruptcy. The photo showed a devastated-looking Michael Corrigan leaving a courthouse. Standing beside him, her arm linked through his, was a teenage girl with fiery red hair and a look of fierce, protective anger on her face. Her features were younger, rounder, but there was no mistaking those eyes. The caption beneath the photo read, "Michael Corrigan with his daughter Catherine." Olivia stared at the screen, her heart pounding. Catherine Corrigan, Scarlett Davenport, they were the same person. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a long con. Scarlett wasn't just a mistress Alistair had picked up. She was the daughter of the man he had ruined. Her entire presence in his life, her ambition, her praise, her seduction was a calculated act of revenge. She wasn't trying to build a future with Alistair. She was systematically positioning herself to destroy him from the inside. This changed everything. Olivia wasn't just fighting her husband anymore. She was caught in the crossfire of a decade-long vendetta. Scarlett wasn't her rival. She was a volatile and unpredictable player in a game far more dangerous than Olivia had ever imagined. She immediately called Ben. "Forget Michael Corrigan," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "I know who Scarlett Davenport really is, and our entire strategy has to change." At the same time, across the city, Alistair was growing more erratic. The pressure of the divorce filing and the financing deal was making him sloppy. He started drinking more. He became short-tempered with his staff, and he made a critical error. Feeling the walls closing in, he decided he needed to move his encrypted hard drive. He couldn't risk Olivia mentioning it in a deposition, however unlikely he thought that was. Late one night, he disarmed the security system, opened the safe, and slipped the black hard drive into his briefcase. He planned to move it to a private vault at his bank the next morning. He didn't know that Olivia, anticipating his paranoia, had paid a former security consultant from her firm to monitor the penthouse's system logs remotely. An alert pinged on her laptop. System deactivated master code. Safe sensor opened. System reactivated. He had taken the bait. The hard drive was out of the safe. It was mobile. It was vulnerable. Olivia now had 2 ticking time bombs on her hands, the hard drive containing proof of Alistair's crimes, and the woman sleeping in his bed, who was patiently waiting for the perfect moment to detonate her own life's work of vengeance. The question was, which one would go off first? The revelation about Scarlett, or rather Catherine Corrigan, forced Olivia and Ben to recalibrate their entire strategy. They were no longer simply exposing a cheating husband's financial misdeeds. They were walking into a meticulously planned revenge plot, and an unpredictable one at that. "She's a predator who has been stalking him for years," Ben said, during an urgent meeting in his office. "Her goal is the same as ours, his ruin, but her methods are unknown. She could be planning to leak everything to the press, sabotage the Sterling Tower deal from the inside, or something far more personal and destructive. We can't control her, which means we have to move faster," Olivia insisted. "Alistair has the hard drive. He's paranoid. He could decide to wipe it or destroy it at any moment. Scarlett's actions might push him to do just that. We have to get to it before either of them makes a move." Their plan was audacious and hinged on Alistair's arrogance. Ben filed an emergency motion for a deposition, citing Alistair's attempts to hide assets and Olivia's fear for her financial security. As part of the motion, they requested a temporary restraining order that would prevent him from accessing or moving funds from a specific list of accounts and safe deposit boxes, a list Olivia had painstakingly compiled. Crucially, they included the safe deposit box at the bank, where she guessed he would hide the drive. He'll see the list of accounts and focus on that, Olivia reasoned. He'll think we're just fishing for money. The safe deposit box will seem like one item among many. He won't realize it's the primary target. The judge granted the TRO scheduling the deposition for the following week. It was a small victory, but it set a timer. They now had a legal basis to intercept the hard drive, but the execution had to be flawless. Meanwhile, Alistair was feeling the pressure from all sides. The TRO was an infuriating nuisance, tying up his liquidity at the worst possible moment. His investors were getting nervous whispers about his domestic troubles. He was becoming increasingly dependent on Scarlett's reassurances. What he didn't know was that Scarlett was also feeling the pressure. Olivia's legal maneuvers were accelerating the timeline. Scarlett had planned a slower, more torturous demolition of Alistair's life, timed to coincide with the public launch of the Sterling Tower. She wanted to humiliate him at the peak of his triumph. But now this unknown lawyer and the surprisingly resilient wife were forcing her hand. She had to act. Her moment came on a rainy Tuesday night, 2 days before the scheduled deposition. Alistair came home to the penthouse drenched and furious. A key investor had officially pulled out, citing the instability surrounding his divorce. "It's her," he roared, throwing his briefcase onto the sofa. The black hard drive was still inside. He hadn't been able to move it to the vault because of the TRO. "Olivia is poisoning the well she's trying to ruin me." Scarlett came to him, her expression a perfect mask of sympathy. She poured him a large scotch, her movements graceful and calm. "It's all right, my love," she soothed. "We'll fix this. You're Alistair Sterling. You're invincible." "I'm not invincible if I have no capital," he spat, downing half the scotch in one gulp. "This tower was my legacy, and she's taking a sledgehammer to it." Scarlett saw her opening. The time for subtlety was over. It was time to reveal her hand and take control of the demolition herself. "Maybe a sledgehammer is what it needs," she said softly. Alistair looked up, confused. "What are you talking about?" Scarlett's sympathetic smile slowly morphed into something cold and unfamiliar. "I'm talking about legacy, Alistair. It's a powerful thing, isn't it? The desire to build something that lasts." "My father had that desire once." Alistair frowned. "Your father? The accountant?" "What does he have to do with this?" "He wasn't an accountant." Scarlett said, her voice dropping, losing its soft, purring quality and gaining a hard, flinty edge. "He was an entrepreneur, a risk-taker, just like you. His name was Michael Corrigan." The name hung in the air between them. Alistair froze the glass halfway to his lips. He stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. The red hair, the fierce eyes. He saw the ghost of the man he had destroyed, reflected in the face of the woman he had brought into his bed. "Corrigan," he whispered, the blood draining from his face. "Yes," she said, her voice dripping with years of suppressed hatred. "You remember him. The man you bankrupted with fake geological surveys for the Viridian deal. The man whose reputation you shredded, whose life you turned to rubble. You didn't just take his company, Alistair. You took his spirit. He died 3 years later of a heart attack, a broken man who couldn't even look his own daughter in the eye." Alistair was speechless, his mind reeling. You're his daughter, Catherine. I prefer Scarlett." "Now," she said, with a chilling smile, It has a certain flair, don't you think? For 8 years I have worked, I have studied, I have molded myself into everything you desire just for this moment. Just for the chance to stand here and watch the light go out in your eyes as you realize you invited the executioner into your own home. She reached into his briefcase, her movements now sharp and businesslike, and pulled out the black hard drive. She held it up. "And you made it so easy," she taunted, "giving me your trust, your secrets, everything I need to finish what you started, to utterly and completely annihilate you." Alistair lunged for it, a primal roar of fury and desperation erupting from his chest. But Scarlett was ready. She sidestepped him, and as he stumbled, she smashed a heavy crystal decanter over the back of his head. He crumpled to the floor, stunned and bleeding, but not unconscious. Just as Scarlett raised the decanter to strike again, the apartment door burst open. 2 uniformed officers, followed by a grim-faced Ben Carter, stormed into the room. "Drop it, police," one of them shouted. Ben had been playing a hunch. Fearing Scarlett's volatility, he had convinced a judge to move up the order to retrieve Alistair's personal effects, including the briefcase, arguing he was a flight risk. He had timed their arrival perfectly. They had walked into the chaotic climax of Scarlett's revenge. Scarlett froze the decanter in her hand, Alistair groaning on the floor, the precious hard drive lying between them. Her plan had been derailed in the final critical moment. Police swarmed the room, securing a dazed Alistair and a spitting, furious Scarlett. In the ensuing chaos, Ben Carter calmly walked over, picked up the black hard drive from the floor, and placed it into an evidence bag. He looked from the bleeding millionaire to his vengeful mistress. "Well," Ben muttered to himself, "that's one way to conduct discovery." He had the evidence. But the storm had converged in a way no one could have predicted, leaving a wreckage of violence and shattered plots. And listening to Ben's frantic update over the phone from her quiet hotel room, Olivia knew that while her victory was now assured, the fallout was going to be immense. The implosion of Alistair Sterling's life was not a quiet affair. It was a public spectacle, a supernova of scandal that consumed the city's news cycle for months. Headlines screamed from tabloids and broadsheets alike. Sterling empire crumbles amidst sex and sabotage. The mistress, the wife, and the $1 million vengeance plot tycoon's penthouse of lies. The media narrative painted Alistair as a modern-day Icarus, a man of immense ego and ambition, who had flown too close to the sun, brought down not by a single misstep, but by the gravitational pull of all his sins at once. Paparazzi photos showed him, haggard and grim-faced, a stark shadow of the charismatic titan he once was, his tailored suits looking hollow on his shrinking frame as he trudged in and out of courthouses. Catherine Corrigan forever immortalized, as Scarlett became a different kind of sensation. Her story was a complex tapestry of tragedy and malice. The media portrayed her as both a femme fatale and a victim of generational trauma, a daughter whose grief had curdled into a cold, calculated rage. Her defense team masterfully played on this public sympathy, arguing that her actions were the foreseeable result of a psyche shattered by Alistair's destruction of her family. She ultimately accepted a plea deal for the assault charges, 3 years of probation, and court-ordered counseling, a legal slap on the wrist that felt to many like a tacit acknowledgement of her suffering. Her war was over, but she was left adrift, a ghost in her own story. Throughout this maelstrom, Olivia Hayes remained a phantom. She was the story's silent, enigmatic center. Tabloid journalists and primetime television producers launched a frantic hunt for the wronged wife, offering 6-figure sums for an exclusive interview. They wanted tears, anger, a tell-all confession. They wanted to cast her in a role, the grieving victim or the triumphant victor. Olivia refused them all. From the quiet sanctuary of her new modest apartment, which Ben Carter had helped her secure under an assumed name, she watched the storm from a distance. "They want a circus." Olivia. Ben had told her, sitting in her small living room, a stack of rejected media offers on the coffee table. "Don't let them make you the main attraction." "I have no interest in their circus," she had replied, her hand resting on her swelling belly. "I didn't do this for an audience. I did this for him." Her goal had never been public vindication, but private liberation. Justice for her was not about seeing Alistair humiliated on television. It was about ensuring her son would be born into a world free of his father's toxic legacy. The divorce was a footnote in the larger legal saga. Faced with decades in prison and financial ruin, Alistair's legal team advised him to settle quickly and quietly. He relinquished all claims to their shared assets without a fight. Olivia received a settlement that was substantial enough to guarantee a lifetime of security for her and Mason, but she took far less than she could have demanded. She didn't want his money tainted, as it was by deceit. She wanted a clean slate, a severing of the final tie. 3 months after the penthouse confrontation, in the sterile, quiet peace of a private hospital room, Olivia gave birth to a perfect, healthy baby boy. She named him Mason Hayes. As she held him for the first time, his tiny fingers wrapping around hers, the last vestiges of the old world fell away. The anger, the betrayal, the fear, it all dissolved in the overwhelming, fierce love she felt for this new life. This was her true north, the foundation upon which everything else would be built. Ben Carter was her emergency contact, the one who brought her home from the hospital, his steady friendship, a quiet anchor in her new reality. With Mason as her motivation, Olivia began to design her future. She sold a single piece of jewelry from her old life, a gaudy diamond tennis bracelet Alistair had given her, after closing a particularly ruthless deal. It fetched a small fortune, which became the seed money for her vision. She didn't buy a sprawling house or indulge in luxury. Instead, she incorporated the Hayes Design Group. Her firm's mission was radical in its simplicity. She wouldn't be designing glass towers for the wealthy or minimalist penthouses for the elite. She would focus on creating beautiful, dignified, and sustainable community-focused architecture. Her first proposal, which she personally presented to a skeptical city planning committee, was to transform a derelict waterfront warehouse into a mixed-use residential building. It would feature affordable family-sized apartments, green roof spaces, and a subsidized daycare center on the ground floor. She spoke with a passion and precision that captivated the committee, her blueprints illustrating not just a building, but a thriving, supportive ecosystem. They approved the project unanimously. A year after her world had been torn apart, Olivia stood on the bustling construction site. The skeleton of the warehouse was now filled with the promise of a new beginning. The air, once stagnant and decaying, now rang with the rhythmic clang of hammers and the buzz of power saws, a symphony of creation. Mason, now a babbling toddler, sat in his stroller, pointing with delight at a passing forklift. Ben Carter approached, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee and a bag of pastries. He had become a fixture in their lives, a beloved Uncle Ben to Mason and Olivia's most trusted confidant. "Look at you, Hayes," he said, smiling as he handed her a coffee. "Building your own empire." "It's not an empire," Olivia corrected him gently, a peaceful smile gracing her lips. "It's a community. Empires are built on power and ego. This is being built with purpose." She looked at the structure rising before them, its clean lines and wide windows designed to let in the light. She then looked down at her son, whose laughter was the brightest thing in her world. She had once been the wife of a man who built monuments to himself. Now she was building a legacy of a different kind, one measured not in square footage or profit margins, but in the quality of the lives it would shelter. Alistair had called her a liability, a practical, boring woman who was afraid of risks. He was right about her being practical, but he had fundamentally misunderstood her. She wasn't afraid of risks. She was simply selective about them. And she had taken the biggest risk of all betting on herself, and it was a wager she had won more completely than he could ever have imagined. Olivia's story isn't just about the downfall of a powerful man. It's a powerful testament to resilience. It shows us that true strength isn't about the absence of pain, but about what we choose to build from the rubble. She transformed from a victim of betrayal into the architect of her own justice, and more importantly, her own happiness. Her greatest victory wasn't destroying Alistair's empire, but creating a new world for herself and her son built on integrity and purpose. What did you think of Olivia's quiet, calculated path to justice? Was Scarlett's fiery revenge justified? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of strength and strategy captivated you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who appreciates a story where the quietest person in the room becomes the most powerful. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more real-life dramas that prove the human spirit is unbreakable